On this episode of the podcast, I have with me Andrew Levy. He is CEO and co-founder at AirCover.ai. We're going to be talking about sales and Agentic AI. We're going to talk to him about how his company came to be. We're going to talk about how he saw the gap. And we're going to actually jump into a little bit of the details of where agents fit in, how companies are potentially just trying to jump a little bit further ahead of where they were with other tech trends with AI. We're going to talk about where the human sits within the sales process and some other things if we hopefully have time to do that with Andrew. But I appreciate your time. Thanks for joining the show.
Yeah, thanks for having me on. And
Absolutely.
I guess just to let the listeners know what we're up to, AirCover, as you mentioned, very much involved in AI agents and sales. What we do is we create digital workers for live sales calls. So what that means is we can virtualize. You can think of it like virtualizing the best parts of your organization, the best competitive intelligence specialist or the best product specialist, the best account executive, and have those AIs essentially ride along in every conversation with your entire go-to-market team. And we can surface information as you're speaking to be able to help that could be sales rep or customer success rep answer questions more effectively, pitch the product more effectively, ask better questions. And we do this all in real time as you're speaking. And then after these conversations are over, well, actually, I should say even during the conversation or after the conversation, we can help automate workflows on behalf of those sales reps. And, we can get into that a little bit later.
Absolutely. Awesome. I mean, it sounds like a pretty integral work. And obviously you've been a co-founder before, you've had an exit, so you've kind of gone through this process. When you're and just to touch on your background, comes through technology. So obviously, if somebody wants to look into that, they can. But you are a technologist. I guess if somebody were to look at AirCover and it's heavily focused on sales and helping the sales process, somebody I'd love to know where that idea came from and kind of what got you started down that path.
Yeah. And actually, AirCover is even starting to be used outside of sales, but that's definitely the first,
Interesting.
group that we've engaged with, and we can touch on that. But if we back up a bit in time, I have an engineering background, but I've started a few companies in the past. The company before AirCover was in the analytics space. If any of you, I'm sure most of the audiences use Netflix, call it between 2011 and 2019, we powered all their telemetry. I think like network analytics and error monitoring, among other great brands. That company, we were on 1 billion devices worldwide. Ended up selling it. We had a funny name at first, actually. It was called Criticism, and then we renamed it to Aptelligent. But that business was sold to VMware in 2017. And at VMware, I led their analytics and automation products for 4 years. And during my time there, I had to train, coach, enable the VMware sales team on a new product in a new space. These were a combination of data center sellers, device and application management sellers, and analytics was a new space, for that business unit. And the tooling at the time was just not up to par. It was okay, let's take a bunch of content and try to dump it into a content repository and hope the sales team's going to engage with that. The alternatives were, okay, let's try and record a call and rewatch it and see what's going on. And that's not scalable. And so the thought was, what if we could embed the entirety of your company's knowledge, domain expertise, process into every conversation and really act as an extension of that classroom environment, right? So we'd spend a lot of time training, in a lot of in-person training sessions at the time, and even then, a lot of that knowledge is lost after 30, 60, 90 days. And so we felt like we had to go back and do it again. And meanwhile, the market's moving quickly, right? New products, new competitors, new personas, whatever it might be. And so we really felt like there's this need for this, if you want to think of it like reinforcement learning for your sales team to reinforce what you've heard in those training environments when it was contextually relevant, right? And that's really the beauty of it is that you may update the field on maybe some competitor or some, part of the product, and maybe it comes up much later. But as soon as they hear it, we're able to actually surface that right information at the right time. And, it triggers that, okay, I know now what direction I need to go into or what sales motion to go down. And the other aspect of it was the data side of things. I alluded to this a little bit.
Hmm.
I mentioned that, kind of rewatching a call wasn't scalable. We really wanted to understand patterns that were, emerging behaviors that were happening out in the field. Uh, we wanted to move beyond just tracking keywords of what's coming up, but understand why are customers buying, or what were the pain points. And that, that's a much more involved analysis. And, you know, so the combination of, this ability to embed knowledge and surface it live, combined with, that analysis of what's working and what's not, that was really accelerated and unlocked with LLMs. Uh, Funny enough, the company got started probably a year before ChatGPT was released, and so we started looking into AI solutions, well before the wave kind of hit the market. And of course, we've continued along the way to adopt the latest and greatest. And so we're this, our timing was pretty good. We're an AI, fully AI native company, and it's when I think to the advice I give to folks that are, buying in this space, one of the things I'd say is you really want to focus on what are the net new unlocks. And AirCover is definitely in that category of what you couldn't do before that's possible now.
Interesting. I guess a question for you: when you first had the idea for AirCover, and I like hearing this from co-founders, is when did you see the gap, and at what point did you go, this could be a business?
Well, it was just how I guess I'd say when I was at VMware and having to coach the team there, I had worked at large companies before, but it was my first time having to really coach a team at that scale. And just the way that we had to do it was completely, a lot of things were manual or not scalable. And those are all great signals that, there's just a better way to do this. And even with uh, kind of the GPT, tooling still in the early days, you had, compute that evolved to the point where you could start to process conversation in real time, right? The costs were coming down. So you had market changes and technology changes that were enabling you to build a business where you couldn't build one before. And that's another amazing signal that, yeah, okay, there's something here and we need to go for it.
Awesome. Yeah, as you kind of mentioned, companies, and maybe we'll backtrack a little bit. I was going to ask you about change management, but when you guys were looking at what AirCover could do, obviously starting with the sales focus first, did you guys have to yourselves internally look at the sales function and envision the change management up front? Because obviously, with a lot of these AI tools, people are going to have to kind of make some of those changes. And I was kind of curious how much of that went into the early thinking.
Yeah. Yeah, I mean, and that's part of what we did as soon as we got started. So the company got started in June of 21. We didn't start selling the product till about 18 months after that. And, during that time, we really focused on iterating, getting feedback and what's working, what's not working. One example is when we first got started, we had this idea that we would essentially guide reps through different stages of a conversation, right? Okay, now you're doing the introductions, now you're doing the, whatever it might be, the discovery. And, obviously sales conversations are a bit more dynamic than that. And so, what we did do from the beginning is really, and make it a priority, is make sure that this is a easy part of your workflow, right? Like we didn't want to be yet another tool sitting on the shelf. And so everything that we've built is automated on behalf of the rep, including, when I launch a meeting, AirCover automatically starts for me. Um, and you mentioned change management. That's an important thing because we wanted to make it easy to adopt. We wanted to make the learning curve, relatively low and easy to use. And yeah, that's how we thought about it because a lot of, and as we've seen from the Doge efforts coming out of the government, a lot of tools just sit on the shelf, right? So, we didn't want to be that way, and we wanted to make sure that we could add value and get really wide coverage, both to help the individual reps, but also the business at large, to understand those insights and get data. We wanted to make sure that, basically we were deployed to the entire team.
Fantastic. I guess to kind of, talk about those companies that are looking to adopt AI tools, right? Obviously, we're seeing AI being built into every single product. Some are a little bit less native than others. Maybe that's not as important for this conversation. But are you seeing out on the market companies that potentially have missed previous tech trends and they're thinking about, hey, listen, instead of trying to go through those different life cycles to catch up, we're gonna jump ahead with AI and just run a POC, dip our toe in, or whatever that could be. Are you seeing that with companies?
Yeah. Yeah, 100%. You have, of course, you have the SMBs diving, full on, using adopting AI tools. You have mid-market also moving very quickly. And then on the enterprise side, they have not been afraid to really start to deploy, in some cases, if they're slower moving, maybe discretionary budget, um, the more forward-thinking organizations are, uh, putting out RFPs. They're getting heavily involved in the space. And a lot of those large organizations, they may have been late to adapt SaaS, for example, if they're a software company. They I know that VMware, for example, when they acquired us in 2017, they were just going through their own SaaS transformation, uh, which may surprise some listeners because at that point it's pretty late. But these companies, they have a lot of incumbent deployments and technology, and that, going back to your comment on change management, it becomes very difficult. Uh, but yeah, we are seeing very much traditional companies across manufacturing or medical devices, insurance, companies you wouldn't expect to be early adopters really start to dip their toe in and take this transition seriously. And I think it's their hands being forced to some degree. Especially if you're a public company, there's an expectation that uh, there's a margin profile that's changing now where you're expected to get those productivity, those efficiency gains from the adoption and use of AI tools. And on the other hand, they can see the potential and the amazing results. And so this is where the CIO office is taking it seriously, and companies are definitely investing. But to actually going back to your other point on change management, the question is, how do you get started? And I think one thing that resonates that we like to talk about is, this isn't necessarily about replacing your team with AI. No one likes to come in and hear that message that, hey, we're going to fire your team and replace it with bots, right? This is really about, and I alluded to it earlier, was the efficiency, the productivity gains, um, acting as an extension of your team. I'll give you an example. A lot of if you're selling a technical product, you may hire a sales engineer or a solution architect to help your sales reps. Typically, those people are hard to hire. They might be also just expensive hires, but typically the domain expertise is hard to get. You may only have, say, one solution architect, solution engineer per 6 or 7 sales reps. Well, imagine now you could fill the remainder 5 or 6 with virtualized versions of that sales engineer, where previously you just couldn't fill those seats,
Mhm.
right? So this is really giving your team more leverage and helping them scale. And arguably, it's kind of like the what happens when you build more lanes in a highway, you get more traffic. You may actually have to hire more people because you're selling more product and the company's growing. Now, that's not to say the revenue expectations, going back to gross margin, the revenue expectations per head may change, but uh, it's actually a driver of growth and shouldn't be looked at as a driver of, okay, you know, let's just start cutting the team. So that's one aspect of that change management. And I think the other is as you start to think about agentic workflows and automating work, uh, I think that's where things like human in the loop can be a good stepping stone. So especially if you're a public company, there's a bunch of rules, regulations, compliance issues you need to worry about. Obviously uh, the law hasn't caught up with the technology in some
Hmm.
cases, and so just having, you know, the workflow maybe fully built by an AI, but a human has to approve it. That could be an easier way for a company to get started where they may not be fully comfortable giving up the reins and having that full automation in place, or they may operate in a regulated industry where again they're just not allowed to do that, but they can still get 90% of the way there.
Interesting. You kind of highlighted a few things there. You mentioned human in the loop. And I guess if you were to maybe highlight two or three things that the agents do and how the human interacts with that activity, we'll call it, or that action. Maybe you could highlight a few because I think sometimes when people hear where agents will fit in, obviously, if it's within their world, it's a little bit easier to see. But if it's something outside of their, area of expertise, it'd be good to highlight.
Yeah. Well, I'll start with examples where you may not need a human in the loop. So if it's a matter of using an AI to help surface resources, content, help you pitch more effectively, help you answer questions. These are just automated things that, you're empowering the human. I guess arguably the human's still in the loop because they're the one delivering the answer, but the AI is surfacing that information for them in their behalf. Um, the other area that we're seeing more and more automation and less kind of an approval requirement is doing things like just having a conversation and then updating your CRM or updating, certain systems. So a lot of times, just to give you one example, sales reps, they have to update in Salesforce, they have to update certain fields like did you identify, especially for qualification, like did you identify, who the decision maker is or what the metrics are, who the economic buyer is. That we've seen more and more, fully automated where you can extract that information out of a conversation. And that, really helps the reps have to go back and put the data in manually. And then, inevitably a lot of reps just don't do
Mhm.
it. So it just gives you, this better data quality. Now as you start to get to more advanced workflows, things like generating a pricing proposal, this is where you have to start to think, are we ready as an organization? Have we built all the controls in to fully automate that? And most of the time, the answer is no. Most of the time, the stepping, the human in the loop there is, okay, let's generate this for you, and then you can approve it or you can use it, not use it, however you like. So there's a lot in that category of helping you generate a follow-up or generating content even while you're in a meeting that eventually we'll see fully automated, and you could extend that to NDAs and data sheets and case studies, whatever it might be. Some of those things are you might feel more comfortable automating than others. If it's a financial transaction, that's where public companies need accountability and tracking. Uh, and that's where all the tooling and the regulations haven't caught up yet.
Absolutely. I guess when it comes to people using AI tools, one of the big areas of concern always is the confidence of the tool. And then obviously adoption happens if they're confident. When it comes to air cover and potentially what you look for or what the product looks for to make sure that people are confident. Obviously, they can see the accuracy, they can understand it. Obviously, there's every model could have some model drift and involved in the product to safeguard against those. Like, what do you guys do And I mean, not from a tech perspective, because I'm sure you guys do a lot. What do you do from the end user perspective so that they feel that confidence?
Mhm. Yeah, there's a lot of different things. So, we make sure to gather signals about what's working, what's not working. Um, we, present the results of our analysis back to both, the end users and management to really help them understand, where they should be investing in. We actually do collect as a part of our AI analysis. We do look at things like confidence levels, um, of certain analysis. We have when we actually surface information, for example, we do in many cases, you're doing fuzzy matching, and so we make sure we keep the requirements very high, or I should say the bar high, to be able to surface something, right? So there's both, there's always going to be some risk of hallucination in AI. The models, the foundational models themselves are getting better. You can really help mitigate it with the controls, like some of the ones I mentioned on top of there.
Hmm.
And we also I know you said not from a technology perspective, but yeah, there is a bunch of stuff on the back end and there's a bunch of signals we can get, even implicit signals about behavior that help us understand and kind of, know what's working and what's not working. And so it is something you just need to pay attention to. The other thing I think that people people are talking more and more about are, the use of more specialized models. And, we're kind of still in this world of, these large monolithic foundational models. But I do think in the future, you're going to see maybe, instead of one giant model for the whole org, maybe you'll have hundreds or thousands of models, even per individual, especially tailored to their use case, built in their voice, so to say. And some people call it small language models, but if you like LLM, you can call it little language model, to maintain that. But that's probably where the world is going. And then, the trick there becomes that kind of routing layer on top of those, right? How do you navigate between those hundreds or thousands of models?
Absolutely. Yeah, that's actually, I actually do agree with you. I think that we will see, I think back before ChatGPT, we were talking about them being narrow models, narrow AI, but now I like little language models. That's a good one. We'll see if anyone will want to champion that alongside you. Andrew, I was going to say thank you for coming on. Thank you for outlining, your approach to bringing agentic AI to a part of the enterprise specifically right now, sales, as you mentioned, and kind of walking us through some of the various components. If somebody does want to reach out to you to chat or just follow up on something you mentioned on the show, is there a good way of doing that?
Yeah, feel free to reach out, Andrew at AirCover.ai, and myself and our team will get in touch.
Okay, awesome. All right, that's it for this episode. Be back again, different guest, different topic. Until then, two things. One, Andrew kind of walked us through how the company started, where AirCover is actually seeing some tangible impacts in the sales process. We talked about the human in the loop, and sometimes when the human's not necessary. And we talked about some of that change management, and we talked about some model drift, and he gave us some great use cases. So definitely reach out to Andrew if you have any follow-up questions. Also share this episode with somebody else. If you are on the enterprise side, this is a great use case to see how you could potentially leverage agents within your company. Also, like, subscribe, comment. Let me know how the show is going for you. Until next time, thank you and goodbye.